Want to share my screen. All right, so today is February 2nd, 2025. My name is Louise Campbell Anthony, Strategy Task Force. Session is starting, session 8. And I'm the affiliate director here with the Peacekeeping Task Force. So welcome to this session 8 strategy session. We're going to go over a few things here today. I hope that you were able to go through the session 7 interim report sent out. I put it in the chat in case you haven't had a chance to look at it. There was a little edit to it that I added to this one, so you can download that from the chat. We'll be referring to that here in the session. I also put in the chat, here we're going to be starting with is the outline for today. I usually like to have to limit the meetings to about an hour to an hour and a half, not over an hour and a half. It gets kind of lengthy at that point. So let's stay mindful of the time. So in our outline here, I always ask if there's any assemblies here to go ahead and put your name in the chat, the assembly you're from, and then the name of the assembly. The strategy task force sessions are open to all American state nationals who want to kind of put our minds together, put our brains together, put our inspirations together, and come up with a effective strategy to get our objectives done here, to get the recognition as America's only government, and to get the systemic solution that we're looking for to stop the 160-year criminal usurpation that's going on. Now, last meeting, before we get started here, just want to mention that the International Outreach Think Tank has invited our fiduciary, Anna, to come to February 12th meeting, which in a couple of weeks on Wednesday, to give us her input on the overall whole execution plan of the American government's Resurgence Project. I did do a video presentation. I sent that out to everybody. If not, if you didn't get a chance to see it, go to the Peacekeeping Task Force YouTube channel or the International Outreach Think Tank YouTube channel. Here, I'll pull it up here. And you can go over the, let's see, YouTube. You can go over the whole presentation there. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours long. I'm going to show it to you here. I mentioned Peacekeeping Task Force. I mentioned that I was going to do a whole presentation over all 6 phases plus the additional addendum phase, so that everybody can get a whole big picture. Here it is right here, the execution overview. So if you haven't gone over this, go ahead and go over that. So on the—
My name is Louise Campbell Anthony. I
let me
am
stop
the
that. If you haven't had a chance to go over that before the meeting, International Outreach Think Tank meeting on Wednesday, because Anna's going to give us her input, and we're going to ask some questions about the strategy behind what we put together, what get her approval on some things, and her redirection if need be on some things at that meeting. So I want all of you on the strategy task force to try to make that meeting, so you'll be there to be able to ask some questions as well. If we open up to the floor, we don't know how much time we're going to have, and hopefully she'll be able to be there. If she's not able to be there, then we'll reschedule it for another time. But that is an invitation for all of us to be there for that meeting. So what we want to talk about today is how to get there from here. Where is there? To the recognition and the systemic solution. That's where there is. Where are we now is, well, apparently not at that point. So the reason we put together the American Resurgence Project is so that we can put together the strategy so that we can get there. We've outlined quite a few things. We have 3 implementation guides for the project, one for the think tank, one for the Peacekeeping Task Force, and one for the assemblies. So the last conversation in session 7, we talked about our messaging. So we're getting prepared to shift a little bit here now in our sessions. We're going to be shifting from putting together the strategy to training each of those entities on how to execute the strategy. So I am preparing for that. And that's why I call it the training prep here in number 4. I realize there's really 3 focal points for the training that I will be focusing on and developing the training around. Last session, we talked about the messaging. We're going to go more into that here today. So the focal point of our messaging, we need to really unpack and hone in on what our messaging need to be so that it can be correct, accurate, and minimize the confusion of how we are presenting the information. The second focal point is our strategy. We talked about that in a couple of sessions back, protecting the people and their assets, what that actually means. And then the execution is the other focal point. We're going to develop the training around. So let's unpack these 3 focal points right now. Now, in the strategy session interim report, I listed some of the names and phrases we often use when we're talking to people in our outreach and in our video presentations and our educational pieces. We use these phrases. So one debate we had was the fact about people, we need to allow people to have their right to contract as U.S. citizens. And I want to come from the angle that U.S. citizenship is only by contract, not by the birth registration or the 14th Amendment, that's in the corporate constitution. Anna did do an article here recently, and she captured the meaning of, or the angle that I want to go from, approach this as. And let's read that. I'll put it in my training prep notes here. The messaging that I want to send, that I want us to send while we're out there doing our public meetings or town hall meetings. The message I want to send is that Americans are nationals. They can be employed as citizens, but retain their sovereignty outside of the 9 to 5. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more detail. But all Americans are either victims of the fraud or they're complicit and criminals, like those, like our subcontractors and what they have done with the birth registration process. And this is from Switcheroo 2 that Anna has written. And this is how her angle, she presents it. The test for being a British citizen or not should be limited to actual employment by the United States America Incorporated, or be accorded to someone actually and factually living in Puerto Rico or one of the other British Commonwealth domiciles among the 7 insular states. And that's what I've said. Citizenship means you're employed. Now, it does mean British subject too, but in our case, we're going to address it as employment of the federal subcontractor. The existence of foreign birth certificates attached to Americans and the existence of interstate British seamen's estates named after us should be considered evidence of the crimes against us, not evidence of an obligation on our parts. So again, my premise is there is no contract that we need to be protecting for the U.S. citizens. Because who are the U.S. citizens? If you're employed, then you can consider yourself a U.S. citizen. But if you're not employed by the federal government, you're not a U.S. citizen. And if you continue to claim you are a U.S. citizen, then you're perpetrating a crime and complicit with it. And that goes for every American that was born on American soil. So they're going to, when we go out to the public meetings, our messaging, that's the messaging that I want presented at the town meetings, the public meetings, is you're either a victim of the crime or you're complicit with the crime. Because if you're not working for the federal government, you can't be a U.S. citizen. Slavery has already been outlawed. And I believe I'm getting confirmation for this too. Our public law outlaw birth registrations. And I'm gonna ask her to clarify and to confirm that for me, but that's how we read it in our last session, what the actual public law says. How we are presenting ourselves now with the understanding about citizenship, it gets confusing. I was confused when I really started studying. If we're saying U.S. citizenship is by employment, and then U.S. citizenship, or that we're saying that Americans are U.S. citizens, but the birth registration was a fraud, it's like a conundrum. It creates a conflict in the understanding of what we're actually saying. So we need to get clear on the messaging we're going to be presenting at these town meetings. Anna continues, says, there is no reason to continue the facade that their abuse of babies in their cradles so as to obtain unconscionable citizenship contracts is anything but a crime. And double ditto their recent attempts to redefine the same people, these victims of their dishonorable self-service and deceit, as transhumans, after these same victims have been coerced to receive mRNA therapies disguised and misrepresented as vaccines. Now, what I say is we can't presume upon them their innocence, as well as we can't presume upon their guilt of being complicit. This is why we need to put the responsibility on every American to self-govern, and they tell us by testimony with the criminal affidavit, criminal information, notice of liability, or in their declaration of political status, they're telling us, no, I'm not complicit. Now, if they don't do either of those, the evidence on the public record says they are. So we have to present the information to them in such a way that they understand what actually the crime is and whether they are complicit to the crime or not. When we take the U.S. citizenship status right from under everybody, you can't be that. If you're saying you are that, then you're confessing to a crime, because we have to tell them that U.S. citizenship birth registration is human trafficking. Yes, David?
Hey, I was just wondering could you post the link to the document or email me that criminal notice of liability? I have not seen that, and I know that's an integral part. That's step 3 and step 4, isn't it? Where that's incorporated, or I'm probably off there because I'm trying to get caught up on all the lessons that you guys have done on this. But I'm really interested in seeing that if you wouldn't mind sharing it. And I didn't want to interrupt you any more than just for that.
All right. Well, I will send it out with the after this meeting, because I like to get back when they have questions. I'll forget myself, and I don't like forgetting.
No worries.
Yeah, email me if I don't give it to you in the next hour or so after we get off, and I will send you that criminal information, because it's part of the implementation guide for the PKTF.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. She goes on to say, these fraud artists, government services contractors, have no valid claim on us, no valid contract obligating our service, and no valid claim that anyone voluntarily received COVID-19 injections under conditions of full disclosure. We object to all such fraudulent claims and all unconscionable and coerced contracts associated with any of these criminal activities being promoted by these British territorial subcontractors, their agents, or their principal. It's time to put those persons responsible for all this harm and fraud in jail, and to release our assets, our public assets, to our own state trust, and our private assets to our own control and possession, free from any further presumption on their parts. Now, this is what I'm going for in the Resurgence Project. Now, when in the phase 3 is when we're actually getting out there, our peacekeepers are actually getting out there, and actually it's once the militia commander and the liaison, the neutral parties, inform them of what a contract is, what the law of the land is, do all the informing of them. Once the county sheriffs and the continental marshals, if they have to step in, then at that point, we're doing a criminal investigation. That's pretty much what we're doing. And I'm looking at how we put the implementation guide together and how we put the strategy together. That's pretty much what we're doing, because if they're not willing to sit down at the table with us to have the conversation about our one fell swoop list remedies and the reform that we're requiring them to have, or the transference of the government's control back to us. If they're not willing to sit down and have those conversations, then it's time for us to start taking names. And we'll have to figure out how we're going to present the charges and what we're going to do about enforcing the law against those who we find potentially guilty. To all those in receipt of this international public notice, this is what Anna says. To all of you, all you Americans, all you United States citizens, all of you, failure to assist us in bringing these fraudulent misrepresentations and criminal activities to an end leaves you standing as willing accomplices, criminals, and outlaws yourselves. That's the messaging we need to go out into the public with. We find ourselves trying to convince them of things when, as the government, we don't have to convince them. We are the government. Just be the government. Tell them what the crime is and tell them what the penalties are. Tell them what the remedies are. And they have the responsibility of taking advantage of that or in defending themselves. The great fraud which has engulfed much of the world must come to an end. The British territorial governments, which have usurped against the national governments, must stand down and come to terms, or the British Crown corporations must be dissolved. This call to action is not an invitation to come up with a new angle, try to force off another scheme. It's a demand, first in commerce and admiralty, and finally, in deference to the law of the land, to do the right thing. So this is the messaging that I want to go out into the public with. You're either complicit, or you're a complicit criminal, or you're a victim. If you're a victim, you have to correct your political status and change the public record that says that's evidence against you that says that you are complicit. That's why they have to change the political status. But that's the messaging we need to go out there in the public with. Now, in the interim report, these names, U.S. citizen, municipal citizen, non-declared American, I said that we need to have a name, what we're going to call them. If they're not U.S. citizens, what do we call them? And I put down in the interim report what I preferred to call them. I just preferred to call them non-declared Americans. I don't know the correct name, but they are what I put in here. It leaves them stateless. If you haven't declared it, what your political status is, and you can't be a U.S. citizen because you don't work for the federal government and you wasn't born in Puerto Rico, then what are you? You're non-declared stateless. So we need to come up with messaging or the word that we need to use to describe them, because we can't use the word U.S. citizen, or else it creates a conundrum, a confusion.
Could I
Other words,
an idea with that?
Go ahead, Tim.
Wouldn't they be a citizen of the state that they were born on? That's how the Constitution refers to them, as a citizen of their state.
Yes. So they would be. Normally, you wouldn't have to declare anything because you just born and you didn't record your birth on the county record. But in this case, what's registered on the public record says that you are a U.S. citizen, but that birth registration is evidence of human trafficking to make you a U.S. citizen by unconscionable contract, which makes it fraud, which means it doesn't have any, like we just read, Anna said.
Yes.
It has no bearing, but it's there. We're going for the crime. It's there on the public record that you are. And if you are, that means you are guilty of a crime. That's all that birth registration means. It does not mean you're a U.S. citizen. It doesn't even mean that you were born on the state you're on, because it's a commercial contract. That's what it is. But it's a fraudulent commercial contract. So in order to address the crime that's on the public record, they'd have to declare that they are a Coloradan or Wisconsinite or Illinois, so that we don't presume upon them their innocence. They have to declare their own innocence. Because we're a government, we can't presume. We just have to let the evidence stand as the evidence. So other words that we use that creates a confusion in how we use them, I put them here: birthright American, birthright U.S. citizen. Of course, they just voided birthright citizenship. The U.S. territorials did. These other words. So I put these words here so that this can get us to talking and debating what are the more accurate terms to use and what they actually mean. One phrase Anna just started talking about too was political office versus public offices. We've been calling their governor, their county sheriffs, their judges, public offices. So the question is, are we going to change that messaging and call it political offices and stop calling it public offices? Because one language we say, we haven't had public offices since Abraham Lincoln, but then we say on the other hand that you have public officers who are corrupt. That creates a confusion. So do we want to change that messaging to call their offices political offices instead of public offices?
May I?
Yes, David.
Yeah, the term officer anyway, as far as government officers go, I've always understood to imply that they were under military occupation anyway since the Civil War, but we have officials, do we not, in our assemblies and not officers? Or am I wrong there?
Well, I'm saying offices.
Okay, I thought you said officers a moment ago. I apologize. Okay.
Well, if they're in a political office, we might call them officers, or we might call. So you're talking about, do we call them political officers or public officers, or do we call them public officials? Is that your
Right,
question?
and I'll take it even further because police officers, their dress, their appearance, their demeanor, the way they act, they're trained is all military, and it's has little to do with anything law as far as we're concerned. And I guess I was drawing that correlation, so I might be steering off the road of where you intend to go. So I apologize. Yeah.
No, that is not off the road where I tend to go. That's actually where I'm trying to go. What
Oh.
words are we using and what messages are we going to be sending with the words that we're using? Now, I didn't even think about officers and officials being different.
Louise, may I?
Yes, Brian.
Yes, Brian Faulkner, Walton County. I'm sorry. I'm a little late. My wife is having some health issues. This goes back to my training from David Wynn Miller, and I know people don't want to recognize the utilization of the parse syntax grammar, but you talk about the word officer or office official. You parse the word, which parse means parts of speech. You parse the word official or officer, office official, al means contract. So the word official means contractor of that office, or officer means er is contract or contractor of that position of that office. And this, like I said, I go back to I've been studying the parse syntax grammar for 4 years, and it's all contract reading and writing, and this is where I would bring my expertise in. You have to, take your book of synonyms and replace the the legal fiction word with a book in the synonyms, your synonyms book with a correct word. And I know people don't want to refer to, like I said, David Windmiller's technology, but it's really breaking down the grammar, the operations of the grammar. Like you take the word, just the word America, you break it down, like you use the word amoral. When you say someone's amoral, they're non-moral, okay? You put the word a in front of any word, it changes the meaning of the word to no or non, or like impossible means means not possible. So the word America means, you parse the word, it's a means no, MRC, I is mercy, and CA is sheep. The word America means no mercy for the sheep, or no mercy for the people. And like I said, I can't get around my training from David Windmiller's technology. So I'm just telling you, if I can be instrumental in correcting the language, that's what I do. And so with that, I yield.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, we do need to get into the language of everything here, because it does create confusion. So that is where I want to go with this part here, our messaging.
I got
But
one
the
last question.
fundamental part, I'm sorry, David, let me say this.
Okay.
The fundamental message that I want to get to is that U.S. citizen message versus nationals, American national message, because that is that's the fundamental issue that created our problem, is where that U.S. citizenship contract came in and enslaved everybody, unbeknownst to them. Even though it was fraudulent from the beginning, people are living up to whatever that registration says. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, to what you just said, U.S. citizen versus state national. I mean, technically, we're non-citizen, non-resident nationals and foreign sovereigns. So, I mean, you could even throw those words into the mix when you're comparing yourself with U.S. citizenship. But prior to the 14th Amendment, people were automatically a citizen of their state, capital C citizen, and a capital C citizen of the United States. But the United States didn't have the multiplicity of definitions that I think it did back then, or they weren't misconstrued against living men and women on the soil, and in the land, as until after the 14th Amendment, quite as much. I'll put it that way. So, but that's my understanding of that. But yeah, I mean, when you say American national or American state national, you could even break it down even further to differentiate from citizenship by just saying, non-citizen, non-resident, national.
Mm-hmm.
And that way they can't confuse them with an American national either, which of course means someone that's on, I think one of the American territories, if I'm not mistaken, one of the territorial lands.
Have
But
that term.
anyway, I don't want to bunny trail too much, but that kind of addresses to what you're talking about. One other last comment though, peacekeepers down there on point 15 versus police officers versus law enforcers. I mean, I don't know how you'd break down syntax on peacekeepers, but to me, it just completely is diametrically opposite of the whole picture or ideal of what we know as a police officer or an LEO, law enforcement officer. So it just puts him on the other end of the spectrum. I mean, I believe that's the word peacekeepers are great for our land and soil and international and land jurisdiction of people. But I yield.
The one reason I put peacekeepers there for us to focus on is because I think there's a confusion with the word peacekeeper. I think when we use the word peacekeeper, they think peacekeepers don't carry guns. There is no inherent protection in the word peacekeeper that comes to people's mind when you use that word. They think that we just lay down and just take anything because we keep the peace. We don't want to ruffle any feathers and that type of thing. We need to, so I put it there so that we can send out the correct message of what a peacekeeper is. But first we have to understand what it is. Because we do say we keep the peace, but we have crime going on. So how does peacekeepers keep the peace when somebody's being shot? So what does that mean? And I'm just bringing these words out and these understandings of these words to the forefront. So as we get into our training of how we're going to training the assemblies on how to go out there in their public meetings and present these ideas, we can put forth the correct messaging, the correct ideas behind what these words mean.
Did
So
want to
that's the
say,
point.
I did want to add one thing really quick to what you just said there. If you think about the PKTF police or the true peacekeepers by the original definition you gave there at the beginning of your comment would be the PKTF liaisons, because we are not armed. We're out there trying to be the bridge between the de jure and the de facto, and we're neutral, as you said, Louise. So I mean, truly we would be the quintessential definition of peacekeeper, versus the county sheriff or Rave, you know, the Continental Marshal Service, you know, the state sheriff, you know, or militia commander or someone like that. And that's in my opinion anyway, but I don't know if I'm far off the mark there or not, but that's kind of just jumped out at me while you were talking.
Well, that's a good division of roles there. And we need to be clear, if peacekeepers in that organic sense does not carry a gun, then we need to identify the county sheriffs, the continental marshals as different from the peacekeepers. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, and
but
I don't know
there
as though
is-
you can, because I know that name is incorporated into Peacekeeping Task Force, PKTF, and I don't know how that would be changed or altered at this point, or if it should. I'm not even,
Yeah.
hopefully you don't think I'm implying that we should, but no, I would just making a point though, the liaison in my mind would be the quintessential peacekeeper by the original definition that you gave. We're the bridge makers. We're not armed. We're not coming across as a threat. We're neutral. We're actually trying to be a bridge between the two sides of the aisle, the two lanes, the two jurisdictions, you know, and so that's just kind of the way I envisioned it. And I don't know how that would, if that needs to even come into play, but just an observation more, at least more than anything.
And now, as you all coming up with questions, David, that is good. As you all coming up with questions, you can send me the questions and I can try to get some clarity from Anna as well, and then from Joe on some of these questions, because yeah, that we say we keep the peace and we report crime. Okay, well, what are we going to do about the crime? Do our peacekeepers do something about the crime? If they don't carry a gun, then what are they going to do when somebody's shooting? You know, that type of thing.
Exactly.
And I know we are defensive. I understand that as a peacekeeper, we're defensive. We don't go on the offense. But defensively, how do we defend ourselves when we're being shot at? Because right now we are in a state of, well, we don't like to say it. We raised our peace flag, but they're still in a state of war and considers us enemies. And they're warring after us and warring after the Declaration of Independence against our sovereignty. So we need to actually hone in on what does keeping the peace and reporting crime and all that really means for us, as we're telling the American public that we're the government and this is what we do when we keep the peace. If we're telling them we don't carry guns, I don't think they're gonna respect us too much. So anyway, we're gonna get more into that as we get into the training part. So now let's go on to, we're talking about the messaging. Let's talk about the strategy. So in the strategy part, I brought out the fact that, yes, our government was created to protect the people and their assets. When I read that word people, to me, I read that the people means all people who step foot on American soil. Not, we're here to protect the American state nationals and not the US citizens. It says people. As a government, we have to protect everybody. We're the government. We have to protect everybody that's on our soil, whether you're an immigrant, whether you are a resident alien, whatever you are. If you're here, you're actually under our protection while you're here. You either have sovereign rights or you have contractual rights. I don't think there's any other rights that need to be protected. Because if there is a right in British Admiralty or there's a right in maritime commercial, those are contractual rights. Other than that, and when they call equal rights and all that, that's all really under contractual. As a citizen, as a U.S. citizen or federal citizen. Other than that, you have unalienable rights, which are your sovereign rights. We're here to protect all of that for everybody. So if we know that a corporation is in the business of hoodwinking you with undisclosed contract, then we as the government have to address that corporation. Just like a corporation is involved with a monopoly or Ponzi scheme. That's what the territorial subcontractors government do. If they find unlawful or illegal commercial practices, they have to bring up a law against it and hold the corporation to it. That's what we will have to do as well. And so as I see us protecting the people and their assets, when we go out there in the public's eye to these public meetings and telling them who we are as the government, they have to know that we're protecting them too, regardless of what status they're in. Whether they're in a U.S. citizen status, if they're in a resident alien status, if they're in an American state national status, we are the government of the land and soil. So we have to protect their rights as well. When we look at the strategy, we talk about the British territorial having their agendas and the agendas that are playing out right in front of our faces. But I want us to look even closer to what their strategy is. And then as we look at our American government's resurgence project, the strategy that we're countering their strategy with. When we look at it as far as a strategy that they are unfolding, then we can effectively counter that strategy. One reason I created the strategy task force was for those military people, those grassroots type activist people to come up with a strategy to counter their strategy. They're not just going to lay down because we stood up our court. I'm sorry, that's my position. They're not. Well, we stood up our court and they're disregarding our common law orders, American common law orders that came out of our court. They're disregarding our credential cards. They're not just going to lay down because we have a credential card or we have a court or we have a county sheriff. The problem is bigger than that. So what I'm going for is a more far-reaching extension, further than just one state, further than just one county. All 50 of us got to stand up in full force. That's what I call it, 50 states full force, even though some people don't like that word force. But think of what their strategy is. And in the interim report, I kind of summarized what I saw their strategy as. And then Anna came up with some she wrote some articles this past couple of weeks that actually lays out what their strategy is. I want us to think about, I wrote it here. When she said in one of our articles that we have to remember that the original plan was to sacrifice the municipal subcontractor. The original plan was to sacrifice the municipal subcontractor, which is what they just did. That was part of the strategy. We need to be careful not to think that all of this is, oh, they have to do it now because they don't have any money. No, it's not that they have to do it now. They don't have any money. They planned to do it. This particular article here, the 5th of July, she told us back in this article, I think it's from 2017. It says that back then, the most recent plan to feed upon us was even worse. The perpetrators, the municipal government doing business as United States, intended to spin itself into oblivion, declare bankruptcy, and saddle Americans with its debts for the next 500 years. Worse, they intended to foreclose on our estates and make false claims on abandonment, allowing their own secondary creditors to come in and seize our lands and homes and conscript us to forced labor again to pay private debts. This was the plan. So when I see Biden come into office after a so-called stolen election, I tell myself, oh, that's the plan. Okay, it's unfolding now. It's not a mistake. So they want us to be debating the wrong issues. We have to know as the American government what our subcontractor strategy is and how they are playing it out, because we have to counter strategy it. In the summary, in the interim report, I said, take a look at what they did. They issued executive order to end birthright citizenship per the 14th Amendment. They declared the fiat currency, FRNs, null and void. They sacrificed the municipal United States subcontractor, which is now defunct. They begun forming and promoting their republic, which by nature can only be formed in a land and soil jurisdiction, not the sea jurisdiction. They planned the Nasara-Jasara QFS monetary system, now positioned in the background to be ready to launch to replace the FRNs that they just declared null and void. They formed and this is what Anna put in her last recent articles. She told us they formed a London-based LLC as their storefront and called it United States of America LLC. Replaced their foreign state-of-state franchises, the legislatures, with similarly named foreign state trusts, like the California State Assembly. This is their strategy, and they're rolling it all out. What we need to do, I think this is the perfect time to call a meeting with Trump and the military, to call a meeting with the Department of State. I know Anna had mentioned, well, they're all in reorganization right now. We need to let it die down. I don't want to let it die down, because we want to be at the negotiating table right now while you are reorganizing. These are our demands. So put this in your strategy, put this in your plans right now that you're in the midst of reorganizing everything. You're downsizing. Yeah, we don't want those agencies either. But instead, what we need to have is some mediation centers instead of those agencies. So you don't have to fire everybody, just retrain them for the mediation centers. We need to be at that table right now while they're reorganizing and tell them what it is that we want them to reform and restructure into, and not just give us what they got. So this is where I say, we come and tell them what our one fell swoop list of remedies. This is all the strategy that we're going to be training on and laying out. The transference of government demands, the government reforms. We talked about this in the last couple strategy sessions. We laid all this out. So we have remedies on one hand for everybody. One fell swoop list of remedies. United States citizens who are federal employees and American state nationals and the ones who are non-declared. Anybody whose foot is on the American soil. The two things that our Resurgence Project is taken down is the British territorial registration and the criminal consumer theft fraud of using our credit, consumer credit fraud. Those two things. So whether you are a bona fide U.S. citizen or not, whether you are a bona fide American state national or not, you have been victims of those two things. And as the American government, we have an obligation and a duty to protect you against the crime. Crime is crime, regardless of what status the victim is in. So these are the strategies that we're going to be talking about in our training sessions to the assemblies and to the peacekeepers. How are we going to be delivering these demands to them? The third focal point was our execution that we're going to be talking about in our training. How do we execute this in public's eye? The American state assemblies are going to be executing the international public notice, the town meetings, doing the tours around their counties and having the town meetings and helping the American public understand the position that they're in. Now, we've passed some public laws, so I think that should be the foundation of our execution. So I think our execution starts this way. We have public laws that we've outlawed birth registrations already, and we demanded our credit to be returned to us. We have public laws, then the Federation would issue, well, the state assemblies pass the public laws. Then from the public laws, the Federation would make a declaration of land law. A declaration on the land of what the new law says and what the penalties are if you violate the law. Then the state assemblies will come in and hold the public meetings to tell the people, deliver to the people, the declarations and the understanding of what this means for them, and require them to be the self-governing sovereign that they are on American soil. And that's where we talked about the criminal information notice, the declaration of land law for the birth registrations. And this is also where I was telling Tim before we started, I'm looking into Eugene's usufruct derivative process. I'm looking into that as something that could be repurposed for this, to teaching the American public to self-govern. And the second thing I'm looking into is Anna's article, one of her articles that she did early on. Here, let me see if I can find it.
Louise, while you're looking for that, have we considered Doug and Christie's a version of Doug and Christie's due process situation where they're actually sending out true bills and then commercial liens on individuals and or their bonds after the notice of liability has been ignored? Now they call theirs criminal information complaint notice of liability, but it's very, very similar, I believe, to the notice of liability that you're mentioning here within the American Resurgence Project. I noticed you just mentioned Eugene. That's why I mentioned Doug and Christie, the element of what Doug and Christie do as well, which is completely different than what Eugene does, but it would be more of an enforcement. Hey, if you still ignore our notice of liability, now there's going to be some consequences. We're going to come after you and put a hurt on your pocket, because again, that's still a peaceful way of enforcement, but it may be the only actual way we have to enforce anything until we do get our peacekeepers, quote unquote, set up on our states and counties. I yield.
Yeah.
May I?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I want to just add value to what the gentleman was just saying. Actually, that's where I'm at as far as litigation, is just in my county and helping for other people to do this. I'm going straight after their filing first a criminal complaint and then filing a claim against their indemnity bond. And if you file so many complaints or claims against any public official within 6 months or to a year, of course, the indemnity insurance drops them from coverage, even really after one claim, and so they have to vacate their position. So that's exactly where I'm at. That's the process I'm implementing, because there is no more talking to these. I've done the things that you're suggesting or you're implementing. You're bringing out in the strategy here, Louise, and so they haven't listened in my situations, and so I'm simply going ahead and filing the claim and against their indemnity insurance. And when like I said, the policy is after two claims. On some of them, it's just one, but after two, they have to vacate their position because they no longer can be insured. So with that, I yield.
Yes. So I do know about the Doug and Christie's process there, because Doug is one of the advisory members here of the strategy task force, and we've talked about that criminal information notice of liability. And that's where actually, that's not really what they call it. That's why I call this one. That's where I got this name, this title from, because I like that title. But I kind of changed it a little bit. And if you see here on the execution, our execution diagram that I put together here in the bottom right-hand corner, I do have as the alternatives that we may have to execute if they don't come to the table. and negotiate the transference of government. The alternative, we have to arrest them for crimes, which or what else do we do? So one of them is file on him or her an agricultural lien is at the bottom right corner there. We can require resignation. There's things that we can do. Now, the agricultural lien process seems to be an individual remedy. So I'm looking more for something that a remedy that the American public can execute without it being so involved. And that's what attracted me about Eugene's usufruct remedy. That usufruct remedy goes down to the foundational problem, which is those British seaman estates and the municipal SESTA-KB estates. It'll educate the American public at the same time, giving them a remedy of how to protect themselves against being human trafficked. So yes,
Louise-
I did look into that.
Louise, while you're on that
mhm.
topic, I just wanted to ask really quick, excuse me for interrupting, I'm sorry. What if a state citizen in a specific elected official capacity on one of the states was to enact as a lawful person, thereby narrowing it down, but still being representative of the entire state, to enforce one of these liens? Then it's not just an individual like ASN, individual ASC situation. I don't even know if that's possible. That may be something you'd even have to ask Anna, but that just occurred to me that, hey, they could then be representing and speaking for the whole state because the notice of liability, as you've named it, would be upon the whole state. And that's an elected official to be representative for the people on the state. And just a thought, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, well, David, you're getting into another another option that we have, and which I've been talking to Adam about. And let me take you back up here. In the implementation guide, remember we have the notice of liability and then the criminal information. Here, let me see if where is it at? Let me go back to the top. This is going with what Brian is saying here. Oh, I'm not in the implementation guide. Oh, yes, I am. So see this here? This is the declaration. No, criminal information notice of liability about the birth registrations. How I laid this out, I was giving it the feel of a class action suit. So me and
Yes.
Adam been going over the possibility of what you're saying there, David, having one person represent everybody, because we're all in the same boat with this. We don't know how we can utilize this type of the type of remedy of a class action, but we're entertaining that as well. And when we have the American public engaged in sending in their criminal information notice of liability and their testimony saying, hey, I'm not complicit to this. Now we have the quote unquote US citizens, bona fide or not, also putting in a claim that will also be included and including themselves in this class action approach. So class action suits, agricultural liens, the usufruct process, and the correcting your political status is the options that I'm looking at to include in the training for the assemblies on what are the remedies that we're going to be presenting to the American public when we go to these public meetings. Now Anna did I found her original, I guess this was her original declaration of political status article. This is like article number 660 something or 600 something or something. I like how she wrote this one out when she say her words she used in her declaration of political status. It talked about the SESTA-KB trust. It talked about the public charitable trust. It talked about all the things that they did to human traffic us. And it goes hand in hand with Eugene's usufruct derivative process, because it talks about the territorial British seaman's estate, and it talks about the maritime commercial estate. So I thought, giving this as a remedy to the American public as their declaration of political status. Actually, I wanted to call it something different. Actually, I called it Declaration of Sovereignty and Self-Governance. That's what I called it. Declaration of Sovereignty and Self-Governance. That they can put on the public record to say, no, I'm not complicit. And they can also, when they read it, they'll know exactly what the history is. They'll get the education. When they read the thing, they'll know exactly what it is that they're doing and what the crime and everything was. So those are some of the remedies that I'm looking for as far as the execution part and how we're going to be having the American public get engaged with us reining in the corporation and stopping the 160 years of crime. Not only do we have to get the recognition or earn the recognition from our de facto subcontractors, our employees, we also have to earn the recognition and respect as America's only government from the American people. And I think that is the biggest hurdle. And that is our teeth. That is our biggest support. Because in the interim report, I brought this to our attention, which I think I've thought about ever since I started that postcard back in February. I thought about when the American people read this is going to anger somebody. They're going to think we are taking over their government. It's going to cause some issues here. So I'm thinking of including things in the Resurgence Project that will address the fact that there could be some civil unrest. There can be some civil war that's being inadvertently caused because those patriots think we're taking over their country in their ignorance. How do we address that? Well, I address it by including them in the process and pulling from under them the thing that they're standing on, saying, hey, I'm a proud American U.S. citizen. What is that? We're gonna take U.S. citizen right off the playing field. You can't say you're that, because if you say you're that, you're saying you're a criminal. So what are you? So they have to come face to face with the reality of, are you an American or are you not American? We have to educate them in the town meetings, in the public meetings, about what that means. And while we're doing that, we're giving them remedies, we're giving them resources that will be, I think they will be, we're coming up with some effective ways of getting the attention of our employees. And that's why I'm considering a lot of different angles of this and trying to include the American public. I'm not looking at just American state nationals. I'm looking at everybody and how we have to include them in this fight. I don't think we're going to win if we don't have all of America on our side. It's like I'm fighting for them and they're fighting against me. You can't win that way. I'm explaining to them and they're debating against me. We can't win that way. We need to look further out past just a status. We have to look at the people as people, quote unquote people. They're all just people. In our training session, we'll get into then the execution of how we will execute all of this. Now, the one thing that I brought out in the interim report as well is the fact that there's a civil side to this problem and there's a criminal side to the problem. And as we execute our strategies, class action is a civil side, or the agricultural lien is a civil side. But then the criminal side is calling it human trafficking. And are you complicit or are you a victim? So I'm looking at both of those sides too, as we are going out there and addressing the American public.
Louise, may I?
Yes.
On your criminal side there, just looking at the list you have, would most of that incorporate having to have the Continental Marshal Service and the state militia being the primary quote unquote peacekeepers. I'm putting quotation marks around that word now that we've had that discussion. But yeah, would that be, I mean, just based off the list you have, whereas on the left hand side, enforcement would be more so on the county level or state internal peacekeepers or something like that, or kind of getting off track.
Well, so on the civil side, we're looking at the American state assemblies or county assemblies engaging the American public to be self-governing with letting them know about the declaration of land law, the public laws, the criminal information notice liability actually goes in the hands of the American public. Every American has that. They don't enforce it like the sheriff would have to do on the other side, but what they will do with the criminal information is they will take that and attach their testimony to say, hey, I'm not complicit with this, and send it to their quote unquote elected officials. So to the governor, to the county sheriffs, to the State Department, whoever it is that we determine would be the right people, the congressmen, their senators and their House of Representatives. Those are the people that the American public who's claiming they're U.S. citizens would send these criminal information notice and their testimony to.
Louise, we could almost have, you could ask Anna about this. I don't know if you'd consider it or not, but you could almost have that be a new piece of paperwork to add to all new people getting papered up or that are considering getting papered up. And then boom, they got that already taken care of right at the beginning. Just have them be part of that introductory paperwork, not to be status corrected. I'm not saying they need additional paperwork to be status corrected, but just as part of their immediate education and understanding, have them declare that. And I don't know if that's going overboard or not, but it almost seems like it would be the perfect opportune time, rather than waiting, several months for them to try to self-educate enough or attend enough orientation meetings or other things to finally have the light turn on and then make that action. I don't know.
I'm trying to make this immediate. So
That's what I'm saying.
The place for this is at that town meeting when you're telling those people, telling the American public, birth registrations are allowed as human trafficking, and you need to declare if you are, you need to inform us if you are complicit or if you're a victim, and this is how you inform us. You need to create a testimony, attach it to this criminal information notice, and send it to your House of Representatives, send it to your senator, send it to the county sheriff, so we can investigate this. And then
the light just came on. The light just came on. Thank you for re-explaining that. Sorry.
So everybody gets involved. And while we're doing this, we're teaching the American public to self-govern. So I've included these types of things so that we can do what the government does. This is what government do. So on the civil side, you have those types of things. So on the civil side, we're looking at that class action type of approach. Now that we have all the Americans telling the Congress, hey, we're not part of this. Now that we have all the Americans loading up their desks with all this paper, then we can get their attention. And so we got that on the civil side, and with them saying that, we know we have a class action approach, a valid one, because people are putting in the paperwork. And then we'll say, send one to your state assembly or send one to the PKTF. We'll have to, put our name in there so we can get evidence of it too. How we're going to lay it all out and actually execute that, I don't know. But that's the feel that I wanted to get with having the public get involved in sending paper, some valid paper and evidence, and sit it on the congressman's desk, sit it on their county sheriff's desk, so that when our county sheriff knock on the door of their county sheriff, we have the evidence to say, oh, this person is saying there's some human trafficking going on. We need to investigate this, and we need to solicit and enlist your assistance with this. So now we're getting their manpower to assist us, because we know we don't have all that manpower, right? So we're getting them to their elected officials in a position where they are required to assist us in the investigation. That's my idea of how this is playing out. Now, so I'm looking for ways of offering the public some remedies that they can execute right then. So they don't need so much education in order to do it. And we don't need to defend it. It's a crime or it's not a crime. And you don't have to defend crimes. Either it's a crime or not a crime. We're not talking about a law and whether this or that. And now, because they have to defend themselves, they're going to start asking the right questions to us. And then we can educate them as we go along that way. But yeah. So how we execute this is going to be included in the training of how we want to do that. Now, on the criminal side, it's going to be more so for the peacekeeping task force and how to lay out how they're going to execute that part. So that's phase 3, where the liaisons, the county sheriff and all that, David, that's on the right-hand side when you get into criminal part. Now, when the liaison and the militia commander goes out and lays out the law, tell them what everything is supposed to be, what the contract is and all of that, and say, hey, we need to have a sit-down conversation. If they don't agree to that sit-down conversation, it's when they are in treason. We need to tell them that their parent corporation already in treason. And if you don't have a sit down with us, then you will be guilty of misprision of treason. This type of conversation has to go on. We're not calling you a criminal right now. We're just telling you, we're giving you notice that this is what you're going to be liable for if you don't have a sit down conversation, so we can talk about transferring the government back into our state assembly's hands. If that's when the county sheriff and the continental marshals will have to step in and continue the investigation on that end. That's where they will come in at. That's our phase 3. All right. So now I was mentioning here, this is also, if we call this declaration of political status that Anna did, I don't know, 2017 or something. I don't know when she did this, but this is going back to the roots. The declaration of political status now doesn't really explain everything like she explained it here. If we can put this declaration of political status, step 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the hands of the Americans, and I like calling it the Declaration of Sovereignty and self-governance, because it sends the message of what we're trying to do. We're trying to teach Americans, empower them in their sovereignty, and teach them how to self-govern. When we put this in their hands and tell them what the crime is and tell them what to do about it, then they can exercise their sovereignty. So I put the terminology Declaration of Sovereignty and self-governance on the title of the paper. Along with the Criminal Information Notice of Liability and the Declaration of Land Law, we'll put this in their hands too. Call it Declaration of Sovereignty and self-governance. One reason why I brought this up, and I think that's why this inspiration came to me, is because there's a problem we're going to be addressing, going to have to address when we go out there and run these public meetings. And that is, as people are declaring their status, political status with their state assemblies, it's going to be a lot of them and too much for some states to handle. So my thought is, let's test this. I want to test this. If we call this Declaration of Sovereignty and Self-Governance and put it in the hands of the average American, let's see if they can get it recorded in their county recorder's office. I know now the county recorder's office is not recording our declarations of political status. Well, we won't call it that, even though that's what Anna titled it here. We can include that down below the list in the document, but let's not call the document that. And we will see if we can get the county recorder's office back in line to do what they're supposed to be doing. And we can get people declared without overloading the assemblies. And the other places we can have them record, because there's other ways that you can record your status other than at the state assembly. The county recorder's office, we know, but they can also publish it in their newspapers. So I wanted to bring in all these other avenues, legitimate avenues that Anna talks about in her articles of people recording their status. And we can use this document as one of those, as the document that they can record in the newspaper, or they can record in the county recorder's office, and we will see how that goes over with the county recorder's office. That's one of the ideas of how I wanted to use this particular document. Then we'll also be seeing how we can guide the county in getting aligning them with what their responsibilities are without being so blatant in their face. So yeah, I'm entertaining how to reuse this. It's a little bit worded different, a little different back the way she used to word it. But my question is, can we use it to her? Can we use it in the way that I'm thinking and use it at our public meetings? We'd have to reword it a little bit, but that's my idea with that. So that's a new idea that I had. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, I know we're getting down on time here. I'm gonna take some questions if y'all have some questions here in a minute. But I think the last thing that I wanted to mention in our execution is this bottom part here. America's only government needs to take a position. We are the government. I keep saying that because a lot of what some of the things that I see is we are this special organization of American state nationals, and we have to have membership in order for people to get access to our information on our websites and things. So that's why I keep just saying, we are a government, you all. We're a government. How does a government act? Government is open to all the people. One thing we have to do as a government, as we're going out in the public, is take a position. Now, these are some of the topics that we need to take a position on in the public's eye, because we're going to be asked about them, because we're going to be compared as a government to the government they now know. The British territorial government, this is some subcontractors, the US government, they're going to compare us, our competency, our legitimacy to theirs. Everything that they're that the US government talks about or is involved in, we need to take a position on those things and be able to articulate them. And when we're asked, we need to have an informed response to it. Let me just go through some of these. Interregnum. If the Federation have always been operational, how did this usurpation happen? How do we know it won't happen again? That's a legitimate question. They're gonna say, well, where you been? What you mean you're the government? Where have you been? Where'd you come from? What makes you the government? And not just one of these patriot groups, you know, that type of thing. We have to, this word interregnum is the word we will have to become familiar with and make them familiar with. War for profit. Mercenaries are not protecting freedom, but ravaging the planet for private corporate interests. We have to talk about our soldiers. Even if the soldiers went to war because they thought they were fighting for our freedom. That's why they went. So regardless of whether they're mercenaries or not, we have to have a way to honor them and not put them to the wayside, claiming that they're mercenaries, which, I mean, we know the truth, but how do we convey the message to them that war for profit is this thing, fighting for our freedom is this thing, and we honor you because you thought you were fighting for our freedom. But let me explain really what is going on. legalize propaganda. Propaganda is, they're allowed to do it. They're allowed to lie to us. If we are the government protecting the land and soil, we should not be allowing the media to lie to everybody, science to be misconstrued and manipulated. Religion should not be lying to us. The public education system should not be lying to us. We can't allow these avenues of propaganda to be feeding the public. What are we going to do about it? We need to be addressed to be able to address these things as we're telling these people that we're the government, because they're going to ask us. The government corruptions. Yes, a lot of people know that DC is corrupt. Well, what are we doing about it? We're filing our liens, we're filing our cases and everything like that. We're starting our we've made it illegal for birth registrations. We're getting our credit back with our banks. We need to talk about what are we doing to deal with the government corruptions that people know that they've been dealing with all this time. The average American knows the government is corrupt. The one that they know, the United States government's corrupt. Yes, the British territorial is saying they taken down the deep state, but you're in partner with them. We need to be able to tell the American public, yeah, they're taking down their partners in crime. That's what they're doing. So we need to tell them to be aware of this that's going on in front of them. The chattel property situation with the bonded birth certificates. Tell them to look at your birth certificates. It's on bond paper. Disclosure of extraterrestrials. Now this is a hot topic here. Anna just came out with an article saying that she is a battle class Sarah from Sirius B. She's an alien. I'm all right with that. We need to understand that this is not our first rodeo. This planet is not the only thing in the cosmos. Trump and the US military have made agreements with these people that's not from this planet. Disclosure is happening now. We need to have an educated position on how we're going to be dealing with that. The Galactic Federation is making plans for us with Trump, saying they're putting the government back in the hands of the sovereign people, but we're not even at the negotiating table. So I have a problem with them. If we're not at the negotiating table, I don't believe a word you say. If you're going to give the power back to the people, like you claim to be doing, Trump, in your inaugural address from 2016, taking the power from Washington, D.C., give it back to the people, but the people ain't even at the table having a discussion. Only your corporations are there. I have a problem with what you say. Then you can't be telling me the truth. You have to be gaslighting me. That's what the Galactics are doing. We have to be able to talk about this conversation in the eye of the American public. Talk about the crime. Talk about the FRNs. We got things in place for that. The bioweapons. We have to talk about that. The transhumanism. What was the plan? There was a plan in place. When they say they have a plan, they do have a plan. And it expands 10, 20, 30 years. The COVID vaccine was not just something to vaccinate the people from a virus. That's not what it was. It's a plan. Why did they want to execute that plan? What was in those COVID injections? We need to be able to have an educated conversation about what's actually happening. This was a warp speed operation from our military. What does that mean? The global trust funds. People are going to want to know, well, why are we getting this free money? What do you mean the government, we already paid for the government? I know we pay taxes. No, it's not because of the taxes. Taxes is another issue. The government services was already paid for, and we need to tell you how that happened and where that money came from. Do we even know about the Davila Trust, the St. Germain Trust, the other 5,000 trusts? Who Anna actually is, as far as an heir of the donor trust families? We need to have an educated response to these types of things and more. These are just some that I thought about. But as we're going out there in the public, we need to put together, every assembly need to have a position paper written up and be versed in that position paper. Their officials, elected officials on the assembly need to be versed in these types of things as the media is asking these questions. Because we're about to get out there, put our boots on the ground and talk to these people on a massive scale. So they're going to be coming to us, asking us these questions, just like you see when they do the press conferences, where they're going to be asking us those same type of questions. So that I wanted to bring that to our attention because I haven't mentioned it before, but it's in our implementation guide for the think tank, something that we were going to be working on. We haven't started it yet, but I'm putting the seed there in your minds that we need to give attention to this as we're preparing. This will be part of our training sessions too, that we can talk about what more to add on here and what type of evidence and what type of supportive information we can add to the position paper so all the assemblies can have it. So those are the 3 focal points that our training is going to be about. I'm going to be doing the training for the assemblies. Boyd Adams is going to be doing the training for the peacekeepers. So we got phase 1, 1A, and 2 for the assemblies. Now I'm going to be doing phase 3, our peacekeepers. Boyd is going to be doing. That's all that I wanted to cover here for us today. Do we have any questions that you all want to address, or any other angles or debates y'all want to engage in before we leave here today? Of course, y'all know y'all can email me and we can go back and forth that way too. When something comes up in your mind that you thought about that needs to be covered.
Well, Louise, I see that list of things that you just read off, and I know they're just ideas and examples that they could be added to, I'm sure, by various people in the assemblies and all. But it seems to me like a position paper for the public could be a good summary overview of many of those points, and then of course directing them towards some kind of medium like a Telegram channel, or ideally more of a government official Missouri or Illinois or Ohio or California government website for the assembly, to where then they could get a deep dive into, well, this is what your American government's doing about these issues, kind of whet their appetite, get them to the point where they're interested. Okay, these people claim to be the government. They're hitting the hot button list of issues here that are concerns to me, that they've piqued my interest. Now I'm going to go get some more information. And then that way, depending on, the forum of the town hall meeting or whatever, you wouldn't have to sit there for hours and hours and hours trying to field questions from people. And maybe, and again, I understand that'll all come out in the training, but that's some immediate thoughts that came to my mind on that. Just use it as a funnel piece, some kind of paper or document that you could give to them, then to say, here, you just want to funnel them and drive them into your assembly website, so that then you could get contact information off of them and have recording secretaries or orientation people or educational committee people reaching out to them and all. But that's what I wanted to share on that. So I yield.
Yeah, we don't want the town meetings are not to answer every question whatsoever that they may have. We do need to have, state assembly needs to have a place where they can go to learn things that they have questions about. The assembly is the education piece, not the town meeting. I mean, we will educate at the town meeting, but the public meetings, but we need to separate the two, because you only got a certain amount of time at a public meeting. You're at the public meeting to be the government, not to be the educator per se, even though you're going to be doing some education. Anything else before we go? All right. All right, everybody. Well, I will send out that implementation guide to you there. Email me. Was it David? I'm not sure,
Yes.
or Brian. Okay,
David.
okay. And then I will see you next time. Thanks for attending the session here today, and hopefully we'll see you at the International Outreach Think Tank meeting, and come with your questions. Send the questions to me and maybe I can compile them that you might have for Anna about the American Government Resurgence Project and the strategy of everything. All right, you all have a good night.
Thanks, Louise.
Good night. Thank you. All right,
Thanks,
bye-bye.
Louise.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.